I've been a ranger in this district for 11 years. I know this forest the way most people know their own house. Not just the layout, but the sounds it makes at different times of year, the way the light moves through it at different hours, the specific quality of silence it has after rain versus before it. I know which sections flood in March and which stay dry. I know where the deer trails are, where the bears den, where the ground is soft enough to show tracks and where it's hard enough that you could walk through without leaving any sign you'd been there. I'm telling you this because what I'm about to describe happened in a section of this forest I have walked at least 400 times. I want you to understand that when I say something was wrong, I'm not saying it as someone who was scared by an unfamiliar place. I'm saying it as someone who knew exactly what right looked like and was looking at something else entirely. It started with the voices. Not my first week, not my first month. 8 months ago, in late autumn, when the tourist season was over and the forest was mostly empty and I was doing a routine check of the northern trail system before the first snow made it impassable. Solo patrol, standard equipment, route I'd done probably 60 times before. Nothing unusual about the day except that it was colder than forecast, which I noted because I always note weather discrepancies in case they indicate something worth flagging. I was about 3 kilometers into the northern section when I heard a woman's voice calling for help. I want to be precise. It was not ambiguous. It was not wind, not an animal, not the kind of sound that your brain retrospectively interprets as a voice once you're already scared. It was a clear, intelligible female voice calling out, "Help me. I'm lost," from somewhere to the east of the trail, maybe 40 meters into the trees. I stopped. I called back. Standard procedure. Identify yourself, stay where you are, I'm coming. I noted the time, 14:23. I left the trail. I walked 40 meters east, then 60, then 80. The voice kept calling, always the same phrase, always at roughly the same volume, always sounding like it was about 30 to 40 meters ahead of me, regardless of how far I walked. After about 120 meters, I stopped and stood very still and listened carefully and noticed 2 things simultaneously. First, the voice was not moving. Real people in distress move, shift, turn toward the sound of help coming toward them. This voice stayed exactly in the same position relative to me, no matter how far I walked. Second, the forest around me had gone completely silent. Not the normal quiet of an autumn afternoon. The absolute silence of a place where every animal has stopped moving and every bird has stopped calling, and the only sound is the one thing that shouldn't be there. I am a practical person. I do not have a dramatic imagination. But I stood in that silence with that voice calling from somewhere that kept retreating ahead of me, and I felt, with a physical certainty that I trust more than most abstract reasoning, that I needed to stop walking toward it immediately. I turned around and walked back to the trail. The voice stopped the moment I turned around. Not faded, stopped. Like a recording switching off, I completed my patrol. I wrote in my log, possible acoustic anomaly in northern section. Grid reference NW7. Investigate further. I drove back to the station. I made coffee. I sat at my desk for a while. Then I called my colleague Dana. who has been ranging in the adjacent district for 15 years, and who I trust more than almost anyone I know. And I described what had happened. She was quiet for a moment. Did it say anything other than "Help me, I'm lost"? She asked. No, just that on repeat. Another pause. Don't follow it, she said. I didn't. Good. She paused again. Did it sound like anyone you knew? This question stopped me. I replayed the voice in my memory, something I'd been trying not to do since I got back to the station. No, I said slowly. It sounded like a generic woman's voice. Like if you tried to imagine what a distressed woman sounds like without basing it on any specific person. Yeah, Dana said. That's what they all sound like. I asked her what she meant by they all. She told me she'd heard it twice in her district. Different voice each time. Once male, once a child. Same behavior. Fixed location that retreated as you approached. Repetitive phrase, stopped the moment you turned away. She'd looked into it after the second time and found 3 incident reports from other rangers in neighboring districts going back about 6 years, all describing the same thing. What is it? I asked. I don't know, she said. Nobody does. The reports just describe it. Nobody's ever gotten close enough to see anything, because the ones who got close enough didn't file reports. I asked her what she meant. 3 rangers followed it far enough that it led them off trail, she said. 2 of them found their own way back eventually, hours later, disoriented and unable to describe exactly what had happened to them in the intervening time. The 3rd, she stopped. Dana. The 3rd was found 2 days later, a kilometer from where he'd left the trail. No injuries. No memory of the time between leaving the trail and being found. Another pause. He resigned 2 weeks after that. I talked to him once. He said the worst part wasn't the lost time. It was that when he came back to himself and looked around, he was standing in a small clearing he'd never seen before. And in the clearing there were animal bones arranged in a pattern he couldn't explain, but felt very strongly that he had arranged himself. I sat with this for a long time after I hung up. Then I went back to the northern section the next morning. I know. But I'm a ranger. This is my district. If something is in my forest that has already disoriented 2 of my colleagues and caused a 3rd to lose 2 days of memory, I need to understand it. That's the job. I went back with better equipment, full overnight kit, satellite communicator, a second GPS unit as backup, and a voice recorder running in my breast pocket. I also went with a rule that I made for myself before I left the station and wrote down on a piece of paper that I put in my jacket pocket. If I leave the trail, I turn back after 50 meters, regardless of what I hear. 50 meters. Not 120, 50. The voice started almost immediately when I reached NW7. Earlier than the day before. I'd barely stopped moving when I heard it. From the east again, same phrase, same quality. That uncanny generic distress that Dana had described and that I now understood. Exactly what she meant by, I stood on the trail and listened and did not follow it. After about 10 minutes the voice changed. Not the phrase that stayed the same, but the voice itself shifted gradually over the course of maybe 2 minutes, from the generic woman's voice to something else. something that made the hair on my arms stand up even through my jacket, not because it was frightening exactly, but because it was familiar in a way that took me a moment to place. It sounded like my sister. My sister has a distinctive voice, a slight huskiness from a childhood illness that never fully resolved, a specific cadence when she's upset that I've known since we were children. The voice in the trees was not a perfect imitation, but it was close enough that my body responded before my brain caught up. A physical lurch toward the sound that I stopped by grabbing the nearest tree trunk and holding on. I stood there holding a tree for what my recorder later told me was 4 minutes. The voice cycled through several more iterations while I stood there. My sister. Then someone else I recognized, a colleague who'd retired 3 years ago. Then my father, who has been dead for 6 years. Each one saying the same thing in the specific vocal qualities of someone I knew, in a tone calibrated precisely to the version of distress that I would find most difficult to ignore from that particular person. It was learning. That was the thing I understood standing there with my hand on that tree, listening to my dead father ask for help in a voice I hadn't heard in 6 years. Whatever was making the sound was learning in real time from my responses. The generic voice hadn't worked, so it was going through its options, trying different calibrations of the same hook, looking for the one that would make me walk toward it. I did not walk toward it. When my father's voice didn't work, the sound stopped completely the way it had when I'd turned away the day before. Then, after about 30 seconds of silence, it started again. Different phrase this time. "I know you're there," it said. Still my father's voice, which was somehow worse now that the pretense of distress had dropped. "I know you can hear me." I said nothing. My recorder was running. I stood on the trail and listened. "You were here yesterday," it said. "You came close." The silence after that lasted longer. The forest stayed quiet around me in the way it had the day before. That absolute animal silence that meant everything with instincts better than mine had already made the decision I was still standing here making. Then the sound changed again. Not a voice this time. Something else, something I don't have a good word for. Not quite music and not quite language and not quite any sound I'd heard before. Low and complex and occupying frequencies that I felt more in my chest than heard with my ears. It lasted maybe 20 seconds, then silenced that then, very clearly, in a voice that was not my father's or my sister's or anyone I recognized, in something that might have been its own voice. If it had one, come see. I let go of the tree. I turned around. I walked back to the station. I have been back to NW7 4 more times since then. I take the same precautions each time. Each time the voice starts, cycles through people I know with increasing accuracy. It seems to be building a library of the voices of people in my life, which means it's been listening to me in other contexts that I can't account for. And each time, when I don't follow, it eventually says something in that other voice, the one I don't have a word for. Last week it said something different. 2 words in that not quite voice after the usual sequence had failed to move me. Getting closer. I have no way to know what it meant by this. Getting closer to convincing me. Getting closer in a physical sense. Getting closer to something I don't have enough information to name. I've submitted formal reports. I've contacted Dana. I've reached out to the rangers in neighboring districts who filed the original incident reports. 3 of them are still in post. One of them, when I described what I've been hearing, said it's never spoken to me directly in a tone that made me understand that this was significant, and that the significance was not good. I continue to patrol the northern section. I continue to stop at NW7. I continue to listen. I have not followed the voice. I want to be clear about this, because the part of this that worries me most is not what's in the forest. It's that each time I go back, the 50-meter rule feels slightly more arbitrary than it did the time before. Each time I hold the tree, the holding lasts a little longer than it should. I know this forest. I know exactly where the trail is and exactly how far 50 meters takes me into the trees, and exactly how to get back. I keep telling myself that. Last time, standing at the tree in the silence after it said, "Getting closer," I looked down and realized I had walked 11 meters off the trail without noticing. I don't remember taking those 11 steps. I filed that in my report. I wrote it down the same way I write everything down: time, location, observable facts. 1447, NW7, 11 meters east of trail marker. Involuntary displacement of unknown duration. I drove back to the station. I made coffee. I looked at the map of the northern section on the wall, and I found NW7, and I looked at what was 11 meters east of the trail marker. It's the edge of a clearing I have never been to. I know this forest. I have walked every section of it. I have no memory of that clearing existing. I'm going back tomorrow. The 50 meters still feels like the right rule. I'm just not entirely sure it's my rule anymore.